never a good sign when they show up.
Rocky film playing Rocky's alcoholic brother-in-law, Paulie. He also appeared in 5 Rocky sequels. Sylvester Stallone called him an incredible man and artist. Burt Young was 83 years old.
Many of the trucks out as possible.
Israel shut off all supplies to Gaza soon after Hamas militants rampaged across communities in southern Israel on the 7th. But as supplies ran out, many families in Gaza were forced to cut down to 1 meal a day and have been left to drink dirty water. More than 200
That's because Hamas stole all the food, all the fuel for electricity.
An initial group of 20 trucks in, but they know if Hamas confiscates aid, it will end. The aid will start moving Friday at the earliest. Egypt must still repair the road across the border that was cratered by Israeli airstrikes.
That's one of the reasons why everything costs more these days.
Of its workforce. This is part of a push to reduce costs following a plunge in its third quarter. Nokia's third quarter sales dropped 20% compared to the same 3-month period last year. The company says it aims to downsize from 86,000 employees now to around 75,000 workers by the end of 2026. Nokia is one of the world's main suppliers of 5G technology. Scientists say that disposable e-cigarettes are posing big environmental risks. They say with the rise of new vapes, cities across the country are now being faced with how to get rid of them. New research shows that U.S. teens and adults are buying roughly 12 million disposable vapes a month. Can you believe that? Officials say that the single-use devices have lithium and other metals that can't be reused or recycled. Under federal environmental law, the devices are hazardous materials and aren't supposed to go into the trash. New York City is already starting to crack down on these vapes, outlawing many e-cigarette brands and banning flavors. Now, researchers are starting to look into develop programs on how to safely dispose of them.
While we continue to collect information, our current assessment, based on analysis of overhead imagery, intercepts, and open source information, is that Israel is not responsible for the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. Several lawmakers here in D.C. yesterday and this morning pointing the finger at Israel, though, and criticizing President Biden. Among them, Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who posted on social media shortly after yesterday's hospital explosion, quote, "POTUS, this is what happens when you refuse to facilitate a ceasefire and help de-escalate. Your war and destruction only approach has opened my eyes, and many Palestinian Americans and Muslim Americans like me, we will remember where you stood."
There you are.
How many bombs need to be dropped on Gaza? The committee will be in order. How many children need to be killed?
Protesters interrupting today's confirmation hearing for former Treasury Secretary Jack Lew. President Biden's pick for U.S. ambassador to Israel. Here's some of what Lew said during today's hearing.
My heart goes out to innocent civilians who were injured, whether it was the gruesome atrocities on that Saturday, or innocent civilians who are living in areas where Hamas is hiding and they get killed because of collateral damage. This has to end, but it has to end with Israel's security being guaranteed.
Committee Chairman, Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, saying Lew is fully qualified to serve as ambassador.
Given the dangerous state of emergency that Israel faces, the United States needs a confirmed U.S. ambassador in Jerusalem.
Meanwhile, ranking member Republican Senator Jim Risch critical of Lew's approach to Iran.
So I'm going to have some questions for you about your activities in what I think was a backhanded way of supporting Iran.
Capitol Police also stepping up security around the Capitol today and urging lawmakers to stay inside as much as possible. You can see behind me fencing around the Capitol and law enforcement vehicles parked in front of the Capitol. This isn't typical on most days here, even when Congress is in session. The Sergeant at Arms telling House offices last night that law enforcement is monitoring intelligence regarding the conflict overseas, and that the increased security here today is because of the potential for demonstration activity. In Washington, I'm David Aid for Newsnet.
It's all that wasteful spending that the Democrats, Joe Biden, is doing. It's going to keep inflation high.
Pointing to the fact that the Biden administration released a lot of money to Iran, allowed them to rebuild their entire oil industry. And he's saying because they don't fear the United States anymore, they're willing to act in really brazen ways, including, it seems the evidence suggests now, including being able to sponsor a terror attack on Israel. What is the answer when it comes to, I guess, strength? Do you agree with that narrative that you need to have kind of an image of strength in order to subdue these types of countries? What's your take?
100%. The United States drives peace through strength, and that's the plan that we've always worked on in the past, and we have not done that over the past many, many years. Previous administrations funded Iran and allowed them to have nuclear capability, and current administration as well. So it's without being political and being apolitical, current administration has absolutely assisted and funded Iran and therefore Hamas.
Well, Casey, there was something interesting. You mentioned the Taliban. So just a few months before all this, I mentioned briefly that Xi Jinping personally met with the head of the Palestinian Authority. They announced a strategic agreement. It mirrors what happened in Afghanistan. If you remember, the CCP had similar meetings with Taliban leaders right before they retook Afghanistan. Why do you think the CCP would actually work with terror groups like this?
It's really to weaken the United States, to throw us and keep us on our back heels. So we have difficulty focusing on not just the military front, but also the terrorist back door. And that goes for terrorism around the world for our troops and our citizens, but also terrorism in the United States with our southern borders being wide open and allowing anything to cross our southern border. So it's really that 1-2 punch. It's strategically a very smart thing to do from the CCP's perspective. And remember, they always follow the Sun Tzu playbook. Win the war without fighting.
Respond by entering the building and going room to room.
Gives us an opportunity to identify any concerns or problems or any improvements that we need to make, because there will always be a debriefing. And at that point, we'll decide together, collectively, what could we have done better.
Got a water leak here. Water main. Shut-off valve. What is the address here? That one's 632 Moreland Avenue. There's an address for you.
Series. What happens next? Guests Greg Roman, Dor Levinter, and Jonathan Tobin join us to reveal the reality of the attacks on Israel. Tune in with NTD host Cindy Jukir and our guest panel, giving us a clearer picture of these global events.
That's it. Just block up the access. Nobody's going to want to use it, right?
Involvement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So what would the CCP interest be in this conflict if it was there between Israel and Hamas? And how could it exploit the war for its benefits? Well, here to speak with us about this is Casey Fleming. He's CEO of Blackout Partners Corporation. Casey, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So why would the CCP want to pull the United States into 4 different wars?
With the CCP's totalitarian objective to rule the world, it's to pull the United States into 4 different wars at the same time. And that's to weaken the United States. So we are extremely weak and we cannot protect ourselves because we're spread too thin with 4 wars. Of the 4 wars, you've got Ukraine, you've got Israel, you've got the partnership with Hamas and Iran, and even the Taliban in Afghanistan. So that's exactly by the plan. And in fact, Putin meeting with Xi just this week shows that it's a plan between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and of course the Taliban, the Hamas, and Hezbollah.
Yeah, well, something very odd. The CCP has been criticizing the U.S. and Israel with the war with Hamas. it's unusual because the Chinese Communist Party, they usually criticize Islamist terrorism, mainly because the CCP, persecutes and tortures Muslim Uyghurs. But here they changed the narrative. On one side, they're criticizing it. On the other side, they're praising it. What do you make of this, Casey?
It's whatever serves their purpose at the current time. Right now, the effort and the thrust is around the Israeli war put on by Hamas and their Palestinian roots. And so it serves China right now to continue to create that narrative to support their whole push behind Hamas and Iran.
Now, what do you think the CCP has to gain, between a conflict with Israel and Hamas?
The gain is to weaken the United States and the world power of the United States for their intent of takeover. So it's all part of that, the master plan. Their plan is to weaken us and have us drawn into 4 different wars at the same time. We as a country and as our free world allies need to be with us as well, is to be very careful not to get drawn into these wars.
There I am down at Skateboard Park. Now look at this. A Kroger shopping cart. And they're fixing to have something going on down here. I'm gonna go find out what it is.
He condemned Hamas's attacks and recognized Israel's right to defend itself in compliance with international law.
Politics is also daring to speak out loud and clearly what we really want to ask. Look at the images. Look at what is happening. The people are asking for a humanitarian pause.
Members called for the immediate release of all hostages kidnapped by Hamas as well.
The EU Parliament is asking for more humanitarian assistance for Gaza.
Lawmakers also called for an independent investigation into the hospital blast in the Gaza Strip. Israel says Palestinian Islamic Jihad fired the rocket that hit the hospital.
Hamas said Thursday that an Israeli airstrike killed a top leader in the House, the head of the terrorist organization's national security forces, and his family members.
A group of Republican senators are demanding that aid for Israel and Ukraine be allocated in separate bills.
They sent a letter to the upper chamber's leadership.
The letter comes as the Biden administration is expected to request $100 billion in aid. Those funds would go towards supporting Taiwan as well.
Several Senate Republicans also want stronger policies to address illegal immigration at the southern border as part of any funding deal. And now some short headlines from around the world.
First, new policies for immigrants and asylum seekers entering Europe may be coming. Ministers from across the European Union today advocating for stronger screening. They also said the Union must quickly expel those deemed a security risk. That's after the war in the Middle East and terrorist attacks in Brussels and France.
To carefully assess all possible consequences for us in the European Union. This entails the protection of our Jewish communities, but also a protection against the generalized climate of Islamophobia that has no place in our society.
Just this week, attackers tried throwing Molotov cocktails at a Jewish synagogue in Berlin. France had to evacuate several airports due to threats of attacks. In Belgium, a Tunisian man shot 3 people, killing 2 of them. France has now banned pro-Palestinian rallies. Germany has promised to take tougher action against Hamas.
Israeli and U.S. embassies in Argentina are receiving bomb threats this week. Both embassies are located in Buenos Aires, the nation's capital. Both embassies received the bomb threats via email. Fortunately, the threats received on Wednesday were false alarms. Officials said they were on high alert as the South American country has suffered terrorist attacks in the past.
Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak met with Israel's president today. The British Prime Minister expressed his nation's support and solidarity with Israel. He also called the Hamas attack a barbaric act of terrorism.
We should call it what it is. An act of terrorism perpetrated by an evil terrorist organization, Hamas. That's what I believe, and that's what we will continue to say. And in that vein, we will stand with Israel.
The UK is pushing Egypt to open the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt. That's to allow aid to get in and foreign nationals to leave. After a visit by President Biden on Wednesday, Israel said it had agreed to allow limited humanitarian aid into Gaza. Biden said Egypt had agreed to open the crossing to up to 20 trucks. Sunak will also hold talks with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before traveling to other regional capitals.
Back in France, prosecutors raided the headquarters of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. The country's national financial prosecutor conducted the raid. The Olympic organization said it handed over all requested information and that they're fully cooperating with the investigation.
And lastly, will there be no more Twitter in Europe? Elon Musk is reportedly considering removing his platform, which is now called X, from the market. That's over a new law in the European Union called the Digital Services Act. It has rules which are meant to prevent the spread of harmful content. They also ban or limit certain users' targeting practices and more. Musk has historically been against such measures, describing himself as a free speech absolutist. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is growing. Palestinians are especially desperate for clean water.
What happens to the human body when it's dehydrated? And how did Gaza get in this situation? NTD's Andrew Thomas has the latest on the crisis.
People in Gaza are desperate for clean running water.
Then performance becomes impaired, dizziness, faintness, you get a rapid, thready pulse, rapid, shallow breathing. Possibly because you're now hyperventilating, that's associated with pins and needles at the fingertips and around the mouth.
So why are Gazans without water? In 2021, Gaza reported that about 6% of their water came from Israel, about 4% came from Gaza's own desalination plants, and about 90% came from ground wells. Now Israel has cut off the flow of water it provides until Hamas returns the nearly 200 hostages it took. Israel has also cut off electricity, which can power Gaza's own desalination plants. Israel supplies about 50% of Gaza's electricity. As for the other half, Hamas has reportedly taken the fuel for desalination plants and used it for terrorist purposes. And that 90% of water from ground wells isn't making it to Gazan civilians in drinkable form. Instead of investing in infrastructure and wastewater treatment, Hamas works on its military capabilities. Hamas also establishes missile launchers and bases near critical infrastructure, so that when Israel targets Hamas, power plants and water treatment facilities are also hit. Those trapped in the strip are running out of time.
In a short period of time, the skin appears to shrink, become shriveled, the lips can disappear or retract and start to reveal the gums, and the limbs become shrunken, scrawny.
Israel has briefly turned on its water supply, but only in the south of Gaza. This is to encourage civilians to relocate away from the anticipated ground offensive in the north, while Hamas encourages civilians to stay and potentially become martyrs.
Death normally intervenes, although it's very much dependent on how much activity, how much water conservation goes on, but death normally intervenes within about 3 days.
Israel has agreed to allow international aid like food and water into Gaza, under pressure from President Biden, but under the condition that it doesn't end up in the hands of Hamas. For now, Gazans are relying on limited stores of bottled water, homegrown desalination plants, and hoping that aid can make it to them. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And next up, we'll hear more updates from around Asia. The Taliban is looking to formally join China's Belt and Road Initiative. While attending a summit in Beijing, a Taliban official said the regime would send a technical team to China for further talks. Beijing has sought to develop ties with the Taliban, although no country has officially recognized the group since it took over Afghanistan in 2021. Last month, China became the first country to appoint an ambassador to the Afghan capital, Kabul, since the Taliban took power.
Japan welcomed Australian Defense Minister Richard Marles in Tokyo. The two sides emphasized their strong military amid China's growing military presence in the Indo-Pacific region. Miles told Japan's defense minister that the relationship with Japan is fundamental to Australia's future national security plans.
We are both allies of the United States. We both have a complex relationship with our largest trading partner, China. We have a deep relationship with each other over a long period of time here in the East Asian time zone.
Our next goal is to improve our substantial cooperation to ensure that Japan and Australia will be ready to work together in emergencies arising in the region.
Last year, Australia and Japan signed the Reciprocal Access Agreement. It's the first such defense pact Japan signed with a country other than the U.S. Talks between top diplomatic and defense officials from the two countries were planned for Friday. However, they were postponed due to the situation in the Middle East.
Meanwhile, Tokyo is demanding that Beijing release an arrested Japanese employee of Astellas Pharma. Japan's chief cabinet secretary said Beijing formally arrested the man in mid-October. He lived in China for 2 decades and was detained in March this year on charges of alleged espionage. China's new espionage law came into effect in July. It broadens the definition of espionage, prompting concern among foreign companies operating in China.
Staying in Japan, researchers from the International Atomic Energy Agency paid a visit to a fish harbor near the Fukushima nuclear power plant. There they were taking samples of fish and seawater. This was the first sampling since Japan began releasing treated wastewater in August. They were accompanied by scientific observers from China, South Korea, and Canada. The samples will be sent to labs in each country for independent testing. A comprehensive IAEA report will follow. Japan has tested the fish and said they are safe.
You'll like it.
Across the seas of Japan, Russia's foreign minister is meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. Moscow has not disclosed the details of the meeting, but the Russian official had earlier thanked North Korea for supporting Russia's war in Ukraine. The visit is thought to be a prelude to a visit by President Vladimir Putin.
The South Korean president has big meetings coming up, too. He's set to travel to Saudi Arabia and Qatar next week. The focus of his trip will include business cooperation, the Israel-Hamas conflict, and possible humanitarian aid. Business leaders, including from Samsung, will also go. Coming up, a small vacuum, a brush, and a soft cloth. That's what it takes to keep Michelangelo's David clean. The restorationist says it's a great honor.
And sparkling wine is replacing French champagne to become the drink of choice for British celebrations. More shortly here on NTD News Today.
Anyone who's ever sold a home can tell you it is really hard. That's why who you work with matters. Together with HomeLight, we've helped thousands of people sell faster and for the best price.
Nice car. Nice. Good Lord, look at that. These scenes are no longer in Atlanta. Now they're doing the other side of the street. Up here where the Claremont is.